Good morning, everybody. Hello and welcome to the fourth and final webinar of the Fit for Food webinar series titled Research and Innovation in Policymaking for Future-Proof Food Systems. My name is Matt Florakis and I'm a scientific project manager at ILSI Europe. And with our colleagues at UFIC, we have developed this webinar series as part of the project Fit for Food 2030. I will also be your moderator for today's webinar. Now, in this webinar, we will explore how Fit for Food 2030 Research and Innovation Policy Lab instrument contributes to food system transformation through fostering multi-stakeholder dialogue, co-creation, and experimentation to work toward more responsive and coherent research and innovation policy. So before we get started, I just have a couple of general announcements. For those of you on Twitter, and I know there's plenty of them now, you can follow us on SciFoodHealth and tweet using the hashtag on the screen here. So hashtag Fit4Food2030 and hashtag Food2030EU. Additionally, at the end of this the presentation, we will be running a live Q&A. So question and answers, and you can submit your question and comments in the Ask a Question function within GoToWebinar. And please, if you have a specific question for one of the speakers, please be sure to write their names before the question so we can allocate the question to specific people. Without further ado, it's a great honor to welcome our first speaker, Tim Lang, who is Professor of Food Policy at City University London Centre of Policy Lab in the UK. And today he will describe the role of research innovation policy making for future-proof food systems. So Tim, I will give you the floor now.
Firstly, thank you very much, and this is very nice. The Fit for Food 2030 is a great project. I've been on the advisory group for it from the beginning. It's fantastic, and I'm only very sorry to speak to you now as a Brit from Brexit land, formerly Britain, but I'm a European. Look, in one slide, this is what I think research and innovation has to address in food. This is a slide I developed when I was a government commissioner 10 years ago in Britain, trying to think through what is it we want from a food system, whether we're looking at the local level, the national level, the international level, the European level. The problem we have in Europe is that we have created a food system using science and technology and innovation over the last 80 years, which made sense 80 years ago. It was the right thing to do. There was not enough food. There was a mismatch between people in cities and agriculture. And it's what in my world we call productionism. Science and innovation was let loose on agriculture to produce more. Then within 30, 40 years, we saw the consequences beginning to emerge on damage to the environment, to water, to land, to soil, to insects, to public health. Over the last 40 years, that evidence has got stronger and stronger. But in the meantime, power and influence has moved from the land to off the land. Almost all the money in food is made not by farmers and growers. If we took a blank sheet of paper, what do we want in 2020 from a food system? It's this. It has to be sustainable diets from sustainable food systems. The problem is, what do we mean by sustainable? I'm someone who works on the policy, on the politics of food, and I'm aware politicians, they think for 3 minutes before they have to go and do something else. So this was developed to be a very short summary, trying to pull together the complexity of what we now need to do for research and innovation, as opposed to just 1930s, 40s, 50s, which was just produce more food, then the price of food will come down and everyone will get happy. We now know that's no good. We have to address health, social values, quality, environment, economy and governance. And if you look at the headlines points there, under each of those are all the complexity. And the problem we have, and where science and technology and then engineering, where research and innovation has to fit, is it tends to be chosen to deal with one issue. So if we go to the environment, a lot of money and attention going on to climate change, but not thinking enough about biodiversity. Now, more interest in biodiversity, but not thinking about the economy or about social values or about quality or culture. The problem we have to do is create a structure within which research and innovation can be socially useful. The problem is science and technology, research and innovation in Europe has basically distorted the problems of food as opposed to resolving them. That's our problem. And we know this. This meeting knows only too well all of this. The food system is already in trouble. The evidence for the last 30 years has got stronger and stronger. Ecosystem stress, the food economy is cheap, too little money, streams of money going to the wrong people, all the money being made by people at the last minute. Big amounts of money. The more you process a food, the more you make money from it. Ultra processing in Europe. Europe, famous for the Mediterranean diet, now eats more and more ultra processed foods which are fat, sugary, salty, and then give us the diseases that put us into hospital. Culture. I'm a social scientist. Culture is something research and innovation has not considered enough. We now eat all the time. All the time. When I was a psychologist, we called it ad libitum. You ran rats round mazes. They could eat food whenever they want. That's what we're doing to ourselves now. And society is totally divided. Big gaps between rich and poor. Food is one of the expenditures of people, and it's also one of the indicators of that inequality. Now, we have to have some proportion here. I've talked of the last 70 years. There has been a massive period, 10,000 years of disruption from settled agriculture to where we are now. And if you look at the bottom right, technology and innovation and research has driven change, particularly in the last 250 years, and Europe was pioneers of this, as we know. But we're now in this battle that I have put in red, the clash of sources of innovation and disruption. Do we make the food system more ecological? Do we just hand it over to biotechnology? So big science, big technology. Is the science and innovation actually not on the land at all, but is all about data and control? Do we get rid of people and just have robotics? These are big choices that face Europe now, which take me back to that first slide that I showed. Now, I put this in. Some of you may know I work on food security a lot, and one of the problems is, what do we mean by food security? And it means lots of different things to different people. But I've put in this slide, which is taken from a book that's just come out in Britain, called Feeding Britain, which is me as a general food policy man. After 45 years of working on food policy, I decided to just look at my own country, the 5th or 6th richest economy on the planet, this strange country, but very interesting country, which has had an imperialist food system and now has been fed by Europe. Now, what is it doing? And food security can mean autarky, you feed yourself and no one else can put up borders, or it can be total trade. It can be about risks, it can be about resilience. You can defend it. This is being hosted in the Netherlands. In the Netherlands in 1944, you had a famine, which then shows up still in the health and life expectancy of the granddaughters of women who were conceived at the time. We know that how a state or a government protects or does not protect its people is a key factor. We tend to have handed over food security to market mechanisms. As we're seeing in COVID-19, the state is back, governance is back. This is really just to remind us there are big philosophical choices, and Europe, even though Britain is no longer in Europe, we're still attached, and many of us see ourselves as European. In the EU, there are big discussions going on, rightly, the farm to fork strategy, Food 2030. These are actually philosophical questions about what you want to do with your land and what is your vision of food security. I'll leave that. Now, I spent the 3.5 years of my life on the EAT-Lancet report from 2016 to 2019. And essentially, the evidence is so strong that meat, at the top of this slide, meat is basically the big impact. Whichever way we look, whether it's at health or it's ecosystems, meat and dairy become the big impacts. We in Europe have turned the Mediterranean diet into the meat diet. The Mediterranean countries now eat vastly more amounts of meat and dairy than they did, and their dietary health profiles have changed as a result. This is global figures of the impact of meat on greenhouse gases or outcomes on land use, on energy use, on acidification and eutrophication. And however we look at it, plants, if we eat them directly, have a lower impact. In a world of climate change, of biodiversity destruction, of larger population, water use, water stress, not just from flooding, but from literally deficiencies and droughts, these are very critical issues. It's why we need to have whatever our research and innovation is, we need to apply the template, that flower shape that I put at the beginning of my talk. We have to fit whatever we're doing in research into that general picture. The background is also this. In Europe, we're on the right-hand side, the high-income countries, the lower and middle-income and upper-middle-income countries are catching us up, as this slide shows. What is going on in the world is a nutrition transition. We in Europe went through that. We're eating more and more ultra-processed foods. On this slide in blue, I hope it's showing blue on your screens. The ultra-processed foods are in blue, the light blue, processed foods. So there's nothing wrong with processing. Putting tomatoes in a can means you can have tomatoes in the winter. But if you put salt, sugar, and fat all around it, well, it becomes ultra-processed. This is from the Glopan report. A very nice summary of the global transition that's going on. We in Europe are up there on the right. What we've got to do is reduce that. The goal is actually for Europe, the rich of Europe, to eat less, the poor to eat more, so that land use globally is more equitably distributed and that we don't misuse our land by essentially having inefficient production, particularly things like meat and dairy. This is about that. I'll skip it. We know the data is so strong. The Poor and Nemechek study on the left, if anyone needed convincing, unfortunately, and I used to be a beef farmer and sheep farmer, by the way, so I'm not being a crazy person. Animals have their place. The point is we've made the space for animals bigger and bigger and bigger. We now probably need to reduce that. I give an example from my own country. Britain has 18,000 hectares of land in the top there in red, usable land, of what in English we call croppable. You can take grass off it, you can grow crops on it. It's about a third of that, 6 million hectares in blue in the middle top. And then I've put in green circled, Britain only produces 160,000 hectares for horticulture. So in other words, for plants directly to us of fruit and vegetables is a very, very small proportion. We grow a lot of cereals. Half of that, about a third to a half of that, is fed to animals who are inefficient. We've got to rethink the relationship between humans, plants, land, space, animals. So that's from my country. If I go to the Netherlands, for example, where this is being hosted from, the horticulture is far, far bigger, but intensive. Carbon auditing of that and water auditing for the Netherlands is a particular issue. So countries need to do their own, and regions within countries need to do their own audits. Now, what are we going to do about this? I'm coming to the end of my talk. I'm a social scientist interested in policy making and what do the decision makers of the food system do to contribute to shaping research and innovation to try and address this problem. And I run through these very quickly. One strand of policy thinking is basically appeal to reason, inform consumers, label people, label foods. But I don't know anyone who has managed successfully to label against the 6 criteria of health, environment, social, environment, etc. I put in my flower shape. I think we've got to develop that, actually. If there's one thing that I would really like to do, it would be to try to assume people are rational. They're not, actually, but to try to address how are we going to do this better. Because at the moment, consumers are completely in the dark. Well, not completely. They're getting better educated about these complexities, but they're not given the means to do anything. They go into a shop, the shop price signals say buy, 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 and then they get a little bit of health education from a government or from dietitians. We've got to rethink this. Option number 2, option B, is just leave it to industry. Don't worry about consumers. Let what we call in English choice editing. Let the choice be edited by industry. Only industry has enough control. They are the gatekeepers between the supply and consumers. Can we do that? Well, they're not doing it particularly well at the moment. All the indicators are getting worse still. But that said, I'm someone in our centre at City University in London. We don't take money from the food industry, but we talk a lot to industry, but we don't do research work for industry. We want to be independent. I think there are some very good people doing interesting things in industry, but the change is not big enough. If you look at and follow the circular economy strategy, it's partly hinted at in Fit for Food 2030, that's interesting. It thinks of food, as I put here, food as material. It's a biological and material entity. We get the food, we eat it, we excrete it, then what happens? Is anyone doing research and innovation on recycling human waste? Because it's a vast waste factory that goes into the sea, pollutes, or we have to then have very expensive ways of taking the pollutants and the nutrients, excess nutrients out. A circular economy would be one where, if I may say, human shit wasn't wasted. There is a vast rethink of sewage and water, not just water to grow plants, and to water for us, but water that comes out of it. So the circular economy thinking, I think, is one of the most interesting areas in research and innovation, but it's not thinking about culture. I talk a bit with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and others in this. It's very interesting, but it appeals to industry because it can be done in closed loops. How do you do that at a cultural level, at a societal level? I think that's big thinking, big engineering is needed there. We obviously have a lot of money goes into this, just seeing the answer as high tech. Everything we do, okay, meat's a problem, let's have lab-based meat. Let's substitute. Okay, biodiversity is a problem. Well, let's do synthetic biology. Let's have industrial insects to feed in industrial fish. Let's carry on with more subtle and better modification of genes. Let's have robotics. Let's nutrigenomics. In science, we love that. We love high tech. Okay, is it dealing with culture? No. Is it dealing in that systemic way? Not enough, actually. I'm a skeptical, fascinated critic of the high-tech approach for research and innovation. Option D is actually what's going on at the moment, which is waiting for crisis, waiting for implosion. There is a big argument in public health, as you probably know, that here we've got with COVID-19 a reminder to industrial European food capitalism, because that's what we're talking about, that actually it's ignored public health, other than just, if I eat this food product, I don't want to die from that food product, and the manufacturer doesn't want to see me die from that product, so they want to make it safe. That's not the same thing as having an ecosystem which is safe. And there's still arguments going on about where has COVID-19 come from, but the big theory, as we know, is it comes from wild animals jumped through to humans from consumption. But waiting for crisis is a bad strategy in policy, but unfortunately that's what happens. Europe didn't sort out its food system until Second World War reminded us that we had to do it. Britain wasn't in the common market when it began, but everywhere was doing the same sort of thinking of saying, we've got to sort out food and farming. So my argument is about COVID-19, not that's what we're talking about, is it's yet another wake-up call that we have to get a better food system in Europe. The track record of waiting for crisis as a policy strategy is bad. Option E is, I think, probably the shortest and quickest one, which is reframe choice, not just choice editing by companies, but we've got to have a culture which sees choice change as important. In Brexit land, formerly Britain, our Prime Minister got coronavirus. He was 17.5 stone. Obesity is a risk factor in survivability of COVID. And interestingly, now there's a commitment to try and do something about obesity. They won't treat it seriously yet because they don't want to do this. This is a strategy known as the Nuffield ladder of intervention from the Nuffield Council on Bioethics. The bottom rung, it's a ladder. The more you get more effective, the higher up this ladder you go. Doing nothing at the bottom through to, I don't know if you can see it, eliminate choice. Can you see that better now? If you eliminate choice at the top. Europe has been more of the sort of second and third rung from the bottom. We haven't actually at the European level moved up. That's partly because health is a devolved responsibility. So in health terms, it's been weakly and badly dealt with. It's only labeling, and I've been critical about what we've done in Europe at the labeling level. I spent 15 years working partly on trying to get QID, in quantitative ingredients declaration labeling. So a label in Europe, the biggest ingredient is the first one. So if it's water that's there, has to say 40%. Took us a long time. Have we got time to get sustainable food labeling? I think we've got to do it very fast, and I think we could do it if we wanted to. So that, as if we move up that ladder, it becomes more effective. Basically, I think what we need in Europe is sustainable dietary guidelines. I think there's research to do on that. What would they look like? How could they be? That needs a policy process. So it's not probably what those of you who want to do research and innovation on it, but it's probably the most important thing we could do at the European level. And we've got to engage with the public. Public engagement is critical. And there is some very interesting work going on around the world of what is the most effective way of getting fast engagement with the public, citizens juries, citizens conventions, citizens assemblies, public events, messaging. There is a lot of research and innovation on that social side that I think has to guide the tech stuff, the techie stuff. So where are we? Am I there? Next one. So what's stopping us doing it? Well, it's the usual things: history, economics, lack of guidance. But I think at the European level, there's some really interesting coming together of this thinking. And in this crisis, I think those of you in the European Union still, you must put the pressure on, support the Commission, work with good people to try and get this done. I think the COVID-19 crisis is an opportunity to do that. And I think the second bullet from the bottom is a critical issue in our experience as policy analysts at our center, is if you have health people and science of behavior people and engineering people not talking to each other, you're then divided. There's no unified thoughts. And in Britain, we're trying more and more to get common academies of science to talk together and to have a common position on things. That way you get faster translation of evidence into policy. And obviously, no country on its own can do this, but I could speak to you from Brexit land, where we've decided we can't decide what we want. A cult basically won a political argument, and now Britain is in a very dangerous position. So I hope we're not going to cause you more trouble, but that's my problem as a Brit. Conclusions. What can we do? Talk and discuss like this. And I was asked to do this talk, and I've pitched it deliberately at this big level rather than the micro level. We've got to have these sort of discussions. They're really good. That's why I said, and I meant it, I'm very honored and delighted to be doing this. We need cross-sectoral alliances. We have to make our governments work for us. They can't just say, leave it to the market. We've got to reframe markets. There's no point just saying market economics. What sort of market? Who? With what goals? Who's going to win and lose? But I come back, my last point, my opening slide, that flower is what in policy terms we call a multi-criteria analysis. So you can't just say cheap food is good, or healthy food is good, or safe food is good, or high-tech food is good. We've got to have a multi-criteria approach to food. So there we are. That's me done. And if you wanted to, well, the Lancet report is there at, I think, in the top 10 most highly cited science papers of recent years. And my new book is there, Feeding Britain, but that's all about Britain, but it's about how do we deal with this complexity. And some of the thinking was sketched in a book 3 years ago with an ex-student of mine, Pamela Mason, a nutritionist, with the paintings of the plants there by my wife. Okay, so thank you.